In just a few short weeks, Anthology Together is bringing you the best of ed tech at the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin Resort in Orlando, Florida. Join the global education community to hear about what's next in the future of learning, get a first-hand look at the latest innovations, and discover new insights to help both your institution and students achieve their goals. The future of learning is here, and there's no better place to see it than at Anthology Together 2022. The event kicks off on July 11th, so register today at www.anthology.com/together. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back with you again here on another episode of EdUp as we are getting into the summertime. I feel like our guests are coming with a little bit more energy than they do during the wintertime, depending on where they are, because they're sunshiny and their energy is there and they're serving students and getting ready for school to return, whether it's in K-12 or in higher education. And I think we have one of those energetic and passionate guests with us today. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. He is Dave Adams, and he's CEO of the Urban Assembly. Dave, what's happening?
Joe, I am excited to be here, excited, energetic, and passionate. It is the summertime, so we spent the whole year investing in our young people, looking at those outcomes, and we're looking forward to getting into the summertime, refining our tools, and producing solutions for the educational space.
I love it. Well, let's assume that we have somebody listening to this podcast that has not heard of the Urban Assembly. So let's start like you're doing your, not that that's possible.
You saw my face and I'm like, what?
Yeah, I know. We deal in hypotheticals here at the EdUp Experience.
Okay,
so hypothetically,
yeah.
Tell us about the Urban Assembly. What do you guys do and how do you do it?
That's a great question. So here at the Urban Assembly, our mission is to enhance the economic and social mobility of young people by improving public education. So what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Here in New York City, where we're based, we have 23 schools where we innovate and then scale those solutions to the higher education system writ large. So that means we invest in social emotional development. We invest in operation supports for schools. It means that we invest in the thing we're going to talk about today, post-secondary readiness solutions to make sure that our kids come from our schools ready to participate in the community. So I'm happy to talk more about this. I'm happy to be here with you today, Joe. And I'm happy to get your audience to know us a little bit better so we don't have to deal with that hypothetical that you talked about a little bit earlier.
Amazing.
Well, I love it. I love what you're saying. You know, post-secondary readiness is a big thing. And it's a big thing for the people that are readying the students, and a big thing for the universities and colleges and others who are receiving those students. And what are kids, what are employers, what are districts, what are teachers, what are parents telling you about readiness for students at the next level, or universities, or those? I mean, you know, what are the key skills? What are the gaps? You know, how do you think about that readiness?
Well, it's a great question. And, you know, each of those constituencies have a different understanding of what post-secondary readiness looks like. But across the educational field, I mean, everywhere from Indiana to New York City, one of the big questions that everybody is asking is how do we prepare students not only for college, but career and community? We have January 6th trial happening right now, or commission, where folks are looking at the notion of civic readiness. We have employers asking us for career readiness in terms of what it means to be ready for the world of work. And then we have colleges talking about college ready. And so each of these constituents are a little bit different in terms of what they're expecting, but there are some overlaps across each of these spaces. So when we're talking about college and career, we're talking about problem solving and collaborative problem solving. And then the first question is, how are our schools preparing our young people to participate in collaborative problem solving, and not of specific 1 + 1 = 2, right? Those are easy problems to solve, but a little bit more amorphous. Like, how might we organize systems and structures around a solution set that folks are looking for? So amorphous problem sets. When it comes to career, that's that space. Now, when it comes to community, the question is, how are we preparing our young people to participate and live in community? Right? The question of how to be in community and how to live in community are questions that the K-12 system should be prepared to answer. And then lastly, we're talking about college, right? We're talking about critical thinking, reasoning skills. Now, these are similar to what we're looking at in the world, but in the college space, we're looking at abstract reasoning, And in the career space, we're looking at applying that abstract reasoning to really kind of specific problem sets that happen across groups and produce solutions and value for our society at large.
Okay, so you said so much in there, and I feel like let's break a couple parts down.
Yeah.
Do the students today want more social impact opportunity as they progress in their life? There's more socially aware than, maybe you or I was. I don't know. It feels like, there's a group of folks, Campus Prevention Network, and this guy, Rob Bulow, who's actually come and co-hosted with me before. And they talk about health on college campuses and wellness on college campuses and the impact that young people want to have beyond academics, beyond the readiness of college, and that there's this social piece that they need to feel fulfilled.
Well, I mean, Joe, everybody wants to have a sense of purpose. All education is the highest quality when it's relevant to the questions that impact each and one of our lives, right? So to the extent that young people today are asking, why does this matter? I don't think it's that different from every student who's ever been in a school, in a seat, asking, why does this matter? I think the difference is that we are challenging ourselves to provide an answer to that really matters, that really is relevant. So the question of why does this skill matter, whether it's algebra, whether it's problem solving or literacy, is not necessarily always in the skill itself, but the application of that skill to real world problem sets. You don't typically, for the vast majority of us, do algebra in the world of work, but right. You do solve problems and you do solve for X, right? Now, if our schools are doing that in a way that replicates what folks are asking for in the world of work, then I think we're getting to that relevance. The same thing with, let's just give an example here, common denominators, right, and fractions. The question of how do we...
You're giving me the cold sweats right now, I gotta be honest.
Coming back today, right?
Yeah.
But the question of how do we solve for the common denominator, right? So the first thing we do is we find a common set of numbers between the two denominators, and then we find a number that reflects both outcomes. Now, how is that different, or how is that similar to what we do in community, right? We have different perspectives, we have different folks with different values and different interests. How do you solve for the common denominator of people, right? And these are the questions that drives the Urban Assembly. These are the questions that drive our social emotional learning programs, our post-secondary readiness programs, and essentially they drive our understanding of what it means to be educated in 2022.
Fire.
Right. So that's a great response. And you think about that, right? You know, how the math skills relate to the real world conversational skills, which we do find most people lack. So maybe as we're training our youth to be much better than we have been, which is, I mean, that's aspirational and encouraging that that's happening at the Urban Assembly. How about financial literacy? I mean, we know this is a huge bit, especially for lower income populations, people of color who are coming up through the ranks, getting in debt or not understanding how financial aid works or how finances work in general. Yeah. We have a great responsibility as educators to try to close that gap.
Yeah, so this is a great question, Joe, and I get this question a lot, and I have some thoughts on this, right? I mean,
that's why we brought you here, to give us all the thoughts.
Everything. It's like today in 45 minutes. I mean, some of this is developing the critical thinking of young people, right? There are a million content areas that we could teach young people about that would have relevance to their ability to solve problems in the world, right? Everything from financial literacy to the penal code. I mean, there's just a million things that matter as an adult. I've been an adult for maybe like 20 years. I don't know about you, Joe. I feel like I'm
still working on it.
You're still working on it? Yeah. And so I think one of the things we talk about this notion of critical thinking and critical reasoning is that, generally speaking, if we're doing our job, we should be able to put a document in front of a young person or an adult, right? And that person should be able to reason through the implications of what they're reading. So the question is, do we need to teach financial literacy? 1 + 1 is 2. This is the carried interest rate. This is how to make decisions around these specific pieces. Or do we need to teach the concept of numeracy, the concepts of interests, and then allow people to use those concepts to be successful? What I will say is that we got to connect these ideas. We got to connect the abstract to the concrete so that young people realize the things that I'm learning in the abstract will help me make decisions in the concrete when I get to be like, Joe, I'm a full grown man and I make decisions on behalf of me and my family.
Thank you for the compliment.
Gotcha.
Not many people call me the full grown man at this point. They call me a large child. But that's a really good point because, 1 + 1 = 2. Yeah, I could teach that to anybody, but can you teach them if they don't understand, if a student doesn't understand interest rates, can they research it? And can you teach them to sift through what's fake and what's real in terms of news, right? Or reporting using the internet and sourcing. Right. I mean, there's a lot of power in being able to sift through the junk that's out there on the internet to find what you need, right? And do you teach that technology piece and preparation for, I don't know, processing information?
I mean, this is what education is going to be looking like as we move forward, right? Knowledge is cheap, and it's just not that expensive. The answer to questions, as my children tell me, I'll just go ask Google, right? Like, that's a good question. Why do I have to ask Dada? I can just go ask Google, and she probably has the answer, particularly if it's a discrete question, right? And so we got to teach kids how to use information and turn it into knowledge so they can make decisions. And that's what we do when we think about our schools and how we think about the role of instruction and instructional foci in teaching young people to take in information, reason about it, and solve problems given all these sources of knowledge and information in the world. I don't know everything that Google does. I don't even know everything that this book on my shelf does.
I don't know.
But our young people, you do. Our young people are going to have access to that. And what they'll need to be able to do, just like you said, Joe, is tell the difference between a fact and an assumption, sift out the difference between how I'm feeling and what I know, how to have discourse in a way that brings us back to that common denominator, that common purpose, and then how to leverage what we know to a problem that we're trying to solve. And that's a different education system. It has different metrics. And we're pioneering that work across our 23 schools here at the Urban Assembly, and I'm happy to support others in doing the same.
Talk about the scope of Urban Assembly a little bit. Number of campuses, states, total number of students. What's that impact look like for you? And your oversight, if you will, and statewide.
That's a great question. So we actually designed and built 23 schools here in New York City, but our reach actually goes way beyond that. Our solutions around social emotional learning, for example, are in 1,800 schools in New York City, serving over 1.1 million kids, and not just New York, but places like Virginia and Los Angeles and Michigan, places like Boston. So the work that we're doing starts in our schools and then generalizes and scales across the country. And the work that we're doing has always been focused on this question of post-secondary outcomes. Here at the Urban Assembly, we were one of the first institutions to look at college persistence as an outcome of high school preparedness. And then we started to look at career pathways and career development as the result of high school investment. And now we're looking at what it means 26 years old, maybe 10 years down the line, around how our young people are sustaining their families around the education that we provided. So a lot of different pathways to post-secondary readiness. And each of those pathways should lead to a family sustaining wage and for young people to be part of their community.
Do you think so? Family sustaining wage, generational wealth. I mean, there's so much of a build that needs to happen from people who are coming from lower income populations, urban populations who maybe didn't have the same access to education, higher education. You're building those bridges, you're building those pathways, you're readying them for the future. And then you're checking in, right? You're checking in to say, did we accomplish the goal? What do you find? Like, tell me the stories. Like, give me an example in the data of what you find as the output from the work that Urban Assembly does.
Such appreciate that question. I really do. So we have a program called Alumni Success, right? And the point of this program is actually to track our students after they graduate, and not just our schools, but also their post-secondary institution, which is not just college, right? Everything from training programs to the military or whatever post-secondary institution they need to refine their skills. And we survey them and we get about a 30% response rate. And here are the things that they tell us, right? The first is that the most challenging aspect of a post-secondary institution is time management. Many of our students are moving from a school which is supportive and say, turn it in and then refine it, to a place that you got to kind of push and manage your responsibilities around work, your family, all these different areas. So one of the things I've been really invested in is thinking about the social and emotional development. How do we teach these organizational skills, these time management skills, so that our young people leave our schools and are able to take on those responsibilities of adulthood, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is it doesn't take a lot to derail our student success, right? It doesn't take $20,000. Sometimes it only takes $250 to really put pressure on their decision-making with regards to what they want to do and what they want to be in life. And so really thinking about how our systems and societies, now this is not an educational problem per se, but it's impacting our educational outcomes. Look at those really specific $250 solutions to get our kids books, to get our kids subway passes, to get our kids over those humps. And the last thing they say is that our schools are supportive, they're warm, they're caring, but society, not so much. And so a lot of our young people are really thinking about what are our schools investing in and preparing them for with regards to the difference between our schools and high schools and the world that they actually have to face. So those are some things we struggle on and some things that we're really investing in solving for.
Anthology is leading the next wave of EdTech innovation and unlocking student success on an entirely new scale. Ready to take a closer look at what's next in the future of learning? Join fellow faculty and higher ed experts for Anthology Together, one of the world's largest education events, taking place next month at the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin Resort in Orlando, Florida. Anthology Together features some of the most innovative professionals from the global education community sharing insights and best practices for institutional and learner success, both inside and outside of the classroom. Register today and attend tailored sessions on topics like creating more dynamic courses for your learners and strategic decision-making across recruitment, admissions, and enrollment. The time is now. Visit www.anthology.com/together and reserve your spot before the event kicks off on July 11th. We talk about this in higher ed all the time about the $250 fender bender that derails a student who's looking at a biology major, and instead of them finishing that course and going on, they quit. They go to work somewhere, maybe in fast food, 5 years pass, 7 years pass, and that whole life trajectory changes. And where do you track it to? That $250 fender bender or $50 ticket, or, I mean, it is that real for students. And in higher ed, we have to get right with that fact that, you know, even adult students, even students for adults who are balancing family and kids and so on, and you get hit with something, it can totally change your trajectory. How do you keep students on the path? I mean, do you have retention services, support services to say, hey, here's an intervention, you know, like a warm intervention. We saw this happen, or we heard this happen. What happened? How do we help you? I mean, is this kind of like intervening model that you have to save students?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. The first is that we have a texting program for our students when they graduate, and it's both content, like here's how to fill out your FAFSA, here's how to access some different resources, but also supportive, right? So what are some challenges that you're facing and how do we connect students to each other? I would say, Joe, the most important thing that we do is teach and develop social and emotional skills, right? So when you're under stress, right, it impacts your decision-making. And under conditions of emotionality and stress, sometimes we choose short-term goals versus long-term goals. So the most important thing that we do to prepare our students for this life of responsibility and challenges is really emphasize their social and emotional development within our high schools, so that when they go out into the world, they recognize how to make good decisions that are in line with the long-term outcomes. I heard one time that self-management is basically taking care of your future self, right? It's basically an investment in your future version of yourself. So every now and then I make a good decision. I'm like, oh, past Dave, thanks for doing that, right? Thanks for putting your wallet in the drawer.
He's a good guy. He's a good guy.
He was a pretty good guy, right? And then sometimes past Dave really screws me over. I'm like, oh, past Dave, why did you do that, right? You're putting me in a really difficult position today.
Yeah. That's funny. You think about that. That's so true, right? So you're talking about grit almost. We talk about this in higher ed a lot. Like, what's grit? Social emotional learning. a social emotional skill development. It's in this situation that's going to be hard, that's going to be emotional. And do you have this, I don't know, perseverance and grit to work through those emotions and move on? And grit, we talk about it all the time. It's so hard to find. And how do you identify that grit? And can it be developed?
Well, it can certainly be developed. We talk about coping, we talk about self-management, goal-directed behavior, self-awareness, relationship skills, right? It's not just an individual level factor. Things like resilience are relationships that students have with themselves in terms of their skills, but that they have with others in terms of your social support systems and social support networks, right? One of the most interesting things, Joe, like that I really have learned is a lot of young people feel like their problem is unique to themselves, you know, and I guess older folks feel like this as well, but just the notion that I'm the only one going through this problem, nobody else has had this challenge. It's really focused on who I am and whether or not I'm prepared to be here in this situation, rather than this is something that happens to a lot of folks. And there are actually some systems and supports that are not necessarily a reflection of whether you're a good person or a bad person. There may just be a reflection of whether or not you need more support in being successful. So this question of asking for help has been something that consistently comes back to me. I didn't want to ask for help. I didn't want to seem stupid. I didn't want to seem like I was the only one who wasn't prepared. And that has to do with your emotions, but also has to do with the skills that have been developed in the K-12 space. Are you used to saying, hey, you know, I feel uncomfortable. This is a problem set that I'm not used to. I don't have to have the right answer to be successful, but I can find the right answer given the resources that are available to me. These are the things that when you develop them are going to help young people be successful.
It's interesting that you say that, because even in leadership, or, you know, as I'm training folks and whatever, and I'm like, you know, asking for help is a strength. That's not a weakness. Generationally, though, if you go back to the greatest generation and baby boomers and Generation X, maybe even Y, we're trained not to ask for help. You know, you just take care of yourself. Don't ask for help. You're going to seem like you don't know what you're talking about. And the newer generations seem more apt to do that, to ask for help. But I think then you add in social media into that, and that there's shaming, and there's bullying, and there's so many things that happen to kids that emotionally that none of us had to deal with. I mean, I can't even imagine social media being in school and what that could do to kids. And there's so much more noise around them when it comes to social emotional learning.
Yeah.
I don't even understand how you guys can deal with that in the pieces all coming in at different. I mean, you think about the number of things coming to a student from different ways, and it's just very confusing for them.
Yeah, it's a great point. And when I think about this question of like, talk about a goal, what am I trying to accomplish, right? What are the constraints to my goal? I may need to know more. I may need to study harder, whatever the pieces are. In that context, reaching out for support is a solution to this problem set, right? The other day, I was in Kansas at Fort Leavenworth, and I was doing some work because I'm an Army and a Reserve and Civil Affairs officer. And this is going to sound really silly, Joe, but I had to print out.
Nothing sounds silly here on the EdUp experience, I promise.
I had to print out these certificates, and I was like spending an hour on this really silly problem set, right? Like, I got to get this hard stock into these certificates, and I wasn't able to solve it. And I went over and I asked somebody for help, and like, oh, that printer doesn't do that. You got to talk to, you know, XYZ. And literally I talked to her, and 2 minutes later, I had these certificates printed out on a hard stock. When I talk to my sons, I say responsibility is doing for yourself what you can do for yourself. And sometimes you're tapped out on what you could do for yourself. You know, I spent an hour on this, and it's time for me to get the problem solved. And that means reaching out to somebody who knows the systems and structures better than I do. So there's that tension point. There's no need to like not be able to do for yourself what you can and attempt it. But there's also no harm in attempting and then recognizing you're at the limits of your expertise. Let's pull in some new blood into this problem set to be more successful. And I'll say one more thing. That's what collaborative problem solving is about, right? Is everybody lifting up their expertise on a problem set so that we can move forward and not just have to worry about how much Dave knows about this computer and this IT system, but how much the whole institution does.
I don't know if you've seen Office Space, but you gave me this whole Dave in the woods with the baseball bat and the printer kind of scenario.
Legendary scene, right? That's like Yeah, slow motion and everything.
That's right. Love it. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the model, right? And you've got on your website, you support schools through innovative tools and programs that build cohesive learning communities for young people through coaching, coherence, and community. The 3 C's, if you will. What
The three
is
Cs.
tell me about coaching, coherence, and community in the model.
Well, that's such a nice segue, Joe, because let's talk about community. One of the things that we've seen in schools is that solutions don't scale quickly enough because so many folks are in silos. And so many folks are afraid, to the point, to raise their problem sets up so that we can all solve them in community.
Yikes!
And one of the hallmarks of the urban assembly model is to build communities of trust oriented around similar problem sets, and then to socialize solutions, not from one school, 2 schools, but all of our schools, and in this case, 1,800 in New York City, right? So that we can learn fast and innovate quickly. So
yeah.
it's not just our kids, it's our model, it's our schools, how we think about things. And that's that community space. So we innovate on things like post-secondary readiness, and we talked a little bit about this before, but one of our new programs is called Early Career and College Awareness Program. This is ECCA. And what we're solving for here is the fact that usually career and college awareness starts at 12th grade, when you maybe take a test, or more likely just say, hey, you're graduating soon, you best be coming up with a plan. Good luck. And so what we're doing with our ECCA work is we're connecting skills to careers and careers to education, so that folks understand what skills they need to be successful in terms of what they're trying to do, and what educational options are available to young people to achieve those goals. Everything from certificate programs to PhDs. Those are attached to what kids want to do in life. And that is a problem set that we're working on through our work. Now, let's talk about social and emotional development. We talked about this a little bit before, right? But how do students relate to themselves and others in order to solve problems? We are 100% sure that learning is not just a cognitive exercise, but a cognitive and social and emotional exercise. So we're out here helping schools across the country integrate these concepts so they can produce young people who can solve not just the problems in their head, but also the problems in their heart and problems of community.
How sure were you about that?
How
sure? You said you're a percentage sure. Do you remember what you said?
I'm pretty sure it was 100% sure.
100%.
Thanks for leading me into that, Dave.
You led me, and then we connected.
What about college? Kids still want to go to college? They still talk about college. They talk about alternative pathways. They talk about, what is that like? Because we're sitting back in our higher ed brick and mortar institutions or online institutions, and we think every kid still wants to go to college, and they're just going to magically show up at our doorstep.
Yeah.
Tell me what kids are saying.
Well, I mean, look, college is in crisis right now. Pandemic saw lower enrollment rates in terms of folks getting into college. The cost of college has folks across the country really questioning what the value add is in terms of a 4-year degree. It's been on college to a large extent, especially some of these smaller colleges who've been closing, to really justify their price tag vis-a-vis what they're trying to accomplish. Now, there are some folks who are just saying every degree should be matched to a vocational outcome. And I disagree with that. I mean, I think there is a role in our country for the development of these faculties, of these critical thinking outcomes that allow students to solve problems. I just don't think it's the only avenue in order to achieve that. So what we're talking about with our young people is, what are the skills that you want to develop because of the careers you want to pursue, and what are the institutional inputs that you need to get to that outcome? If you want to develop your air traffic control skills, for example, I saw it on TV one time, want to be an air traffic controller. What are the institutional inputs that allow you to get to that outcome? And then how do we solve for this problem of debt? I mean, Joe, we know the question of college debt is the question that's constraining a lot of folks from the middle class. Some folks are at graduate level degrees, but are not really participating in the middle class because of the debt that those graduate level degrees incurred upon them. So what we need to do is make sure that kids have the right understanding about institutions, skills, and careers, and then help match those things in ways that promote social and economic mobility.
Well said. There's the the direct to path to skills and jobs. There's the liberal arts education that teaches you about life and learning and processing information. No path is wrong. I think you'd say, Dave, and I hope you'd say that we just want students to pick a path and stick with it, right? I feel like we have this great responsibility as educators. You look at 39 million people with some college no degree, and you go, where did we fail? Where did we fail all these people that they said, I don't want to go to college anymore? You know, there's a lot there. So what did we not say? What did we not say about the Urban Assembly? Something you'd like to say? Any events you have coming up? Any speaking engagements you have? You get to plug the website, whatever you want to do to plug the Urban Assembly. And then after that, you've got to tell me what you think the future of education looks like.
Well, such an interesting question, because actually I will be in Boston tomorrow at New Profit talking about the future of education. So folks can certainly sign up to that. If folks are across your listeners want to get support from the Urban Assembly and things like algebra success, social emotional learning, post-secondary readiness, alumni success, you just got to go to urbanassembly.org and you can sign up for any of our professional development. You can sign up for coaching, and you can sign up to make sure that your school is oriented around these principles of post-secondary access and readiness. Last thing I'll say with regards to the UA that's been really important to me, Joe, is that we innovate. We're about innovation, and we're about taking innovation and scaling it. So if your listeners have a problem set and they really want to connect to other schools and work on those problem sets together, we are happy to make that happen because the solution is in the room. Just like our young person didn't ask for help, we got a lot of schools and districts who are not asking for help and not accessing the knowledge that already exists. So that's what we are, that's what we do, and that's how to reach us.
So again,
attention.
You need to go to urbanassembly.org. You can connect with Dave on what? LinkedIn, Dave? You're all over LinkedIn somewhere?
LinkedIn, just David Adams. Yeah, Urban Assembly, right. David Adams.
David Adams, you'll find him. He's there. I can guarantee you he'll be willing to talk to you about the work the Urban Assembly is doing, and he'll be passionate when he does it. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is again. He's your guest and mine. He's Dave Adams. He's CEO of the Urban Assembly. Dave, did you have a good time here on the EdUp Experience today?
The best time. Best thing that happened to me today, Joe. Thanks.
Oh, you're too kind. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. Anthology Together is one of the world's largest education events, bringing faculty and administrators together to share best practices, testimonials, and creative solutions using technology. Join your university colleagues for a week of networking and learning at the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin Resort in Orlando, Florida this July.